Welcome to the Bariatric Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Lloyd, mindset mentor, somatic coach, and transformational guide for those on the path to true healing. Whether you've had weight loss surgery or on GLP-1s or simply seeking a new way forward with food and your body, this space is for you. This podcast is a mission to change the narrative, unlearning the patterns that no longer serve you, moving beyond quick fixes into deep, embodied healing, lasting mindset shifts, and true self-leadership. We are healing from the roots, rewiring the mind, regulating the body, and returning home to ourselves. We are here for growth rooted in honesty and self-trust because that, my friends, is the foundation of healing. So grab your cup of joe or your H2O and let's go. Welcome back, everybody, to the Bariatric Mindset Podcast. I am Kristen Lloyd, and I am here once again with Coach Frances Vogel with Team Bariatric Mindset. Welcome, and thanks for joining me again today, Frances.
Thank you so much for having me once again. It's such a great pleasure to be able to be here, and we got a great topic, so I'm ready to get started.
I know. Today we're unpacking the differences between disordered eating and what a clinical eating disorder is, specifically binge eating. Overeating is not considered a clinical eating disorder, but we know that a lot of people will have overeating tendencies or emotional eating tendencies, which can fall into the disordered eating category. We're going to talk about diet mentality, bariatric surgery, and transfer addiction, and why this matters for bariatric patients, those on a GLP-1 or on a weight loss journey, because it's hugely impactful for how you see your body, how you relate to and interact with food, how you nourish yourself, and it impacts body image, but also, as we talk about transfer addiction, how you self-soothe. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So this is a follow-up to a podcast that we recorded last time about diet mentality. And it really is, I think, the meat of what so many of us come to bariatric surgery with, or using a GLP-1, losing weight. We really come to the table with some type of disordered eating, overeating, binge eating. It could be an eating disorder, depending on where you fall in those lines. And I think that as we discuss this further, at different times in our lives, we may have experienced different parts of this, but it all falls underneath this umbrella of this diet mentality. And we learned, most of us at a young age, that food was labeled good and bad. And therefore, if we were eating a specific way at a specific time, we felt either good or bad. And those emotions carried forward after the eating episode. We get up from the dinner table, and based on what we consumed at dinner was then how we potentially felt after the meal. And that's where a lot of the shame and guilt comes in. And depending on how our behaviors were, whether we hid while we ate, whether we were afraid to eat specific foods in front of other people because we would be labeled a specific way, it is not, I'm going to say fair, and I don't know if that's quite the right word, but it is not normal for anyone to not be able to enjoy a piece of birthday cake or enjoy a cookie or enjoy pie. But when you are 350 pounds and you're enjoying a piece of pie or a cookie or ice cream, there are people out there that are really in their head. And this is even, we can even say as bariatric patients, that is us as well, that before we educate ourselves on some of this, that there can be shame that we are putting towards them for eating those things at all, ever. So that's my thoughts, right in a nutshell real quick, but I'm interested to see where this topic goes further with you and I.
Yeah, I can remember anytime there was a gathering when you were talking about birthday cake, if somebody offered me sweets or a cake or something and there was a party, when I was living in a much larger body, there was a belief that I had about myself, but also about other people. My thought process was, I shouldn't be eating this, not because I want it or I don't want it, but because other people are going to think I don't need it, that other people are going to be judging me and having or holding an opinion about me as a result of me eating this. And I would feel intense shame to the point that I did not eat in public unless I was in a restaurant, like with people where we were clearly out to dinner, like in a booth or something. But even then it was uncomfortable, I think, to eat in public for fear of being judged or what other people would think of me or the judgment of how much I ate. And that was something that I struggled with for a really long time. And when you think about that, like when I step back and think about that now and think about what just eating in general, like it's so fundamental to living.
Yes, exactly. You must have food to live.
Exactly. You must have food to live. And when there's judgment where it's socialized judgment, where I can make an assumption, I'm not in other people's heads. I do not have control over what other people think. I do not have control over what other people say. It was not a control thing. Maybe it was, but it was more of, I want to alter the story of how they see me. And so I would eat very much in secret. I would buy food that would last 2 or 3 meals. I personally didn't meet the criteria for binge eating disorder, but I was probably on the cusp prior to my surgery.
And I think that's changed a little bit over the years, maybe when you had surgery, 13, 14 years ago?
It was 2013. So it was 12 years ago.
12 years ago. So I think that the binge eating disorder has changed over the years because as all eating disorder kind of guidelines have evolved, and we've learned so much more about them. I didn't mean to interrupt, but what you probably did have some of it then, or were really on that. And so therefore you couldn't be diagnosed with it. Therefore they didn't have any better solutions kind of to guide you in therapeutics. And now, luckily, there are some other medications and therapeutics that people can utilize specifically for BED.
Yeah. But when we think about the pattern of how we adjust, and I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, if I were, which I did do a lot of fast food ordering out, restaurant eating, I would order multiple meals. You probably heard, I'm sure that somebody else has talked about this somewhere in a book or somewhere, but I did it too. It was, I wouldn't just order like 6 tacos. I wouldn't just order like 3 burgers. I would order 3 whole meals so that it looked like I was deep. Like I would make it look like I was ordering for other people. Like
absolutely.
My shame, hiding behind the guys, even though you didn't need 3 Cokes or whatever it is. And you're absolutely right, because I have heard that story over and over and over again. And yes, by the time, you and I got the surgery, our capacity to consume large quantities of food was great. And that's why most people end up having bariatric surgery, because they know they can't stop once they've started. It's this really, their body metabolically must consume a high rate of calories in order to stay not alive in the sense of you're going to die because you're malnourished, but your brain takes over. You've got that hormonal takeover of the brain that's saying you're going to die if you don't consume 3,000-4,000 calories. And that's the loop that so many of us get into. And that I think that as science has evolved, we're learning more, and the GLP-1s are starting to kind of help with that in so many ways. While we're talking, I was thinking about a little just history. I grew up, I have 3 siblings. All sisters were all within 1.5 years, 2 years apart. And so we grew up very much together. There was 4 girls in a household, and we were all teens at the same time, 12 to 17, all in the house at the same time. I was the big one. And again, you go back and you look at those photos, I really wasn't that big, but boy, I was the big one. I was tall. I'm almost 6 foot tall, or actually I am, right at
shrinking as I get older.
Same.
But I was always the big boned one, the bigger sister. And my other siblings could eat so much food. I remember watching them eat a half a loaf of bread in a sitting, Pop-Tarts, all the things, the cereals. And I wasn't allowed to eat those things because my mom really at a young age, she was raised in an environment where being thin was the right way to be, right? She was the mom who took diet pills while she was pregnant because God forbid she gained weight. And that was society putting on her. I mean, that wasn't her doing it to herself. It was her taking the advice of her doctors at the time because that's what they thought was best. Don't gain any weight when you're pregnant. And so I watched my siblings consume large amounts of food. And I was a child, we're talking 12, 13, 14 years old. I wasn't obese by any way, shape, or form, but I was so shamed in the way that I ate, or if I did eat in front of them, because I was heavier than them. And it must have been that I was eating way too much. And so at a very young age, I learned to hide that, to hide even just eating normally. And also to be like, wow, I'm on a diet. My mom, again, she did the best she could with the information she had. I started going to diet doctors. I think the first time I went to a diet doctor, I was 10, maybe 11 years old. And I don't know what they gave me, but trust me, I'm sure it didn't help with my metabolism at the time, taking shots, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that my story, and the reason why I'm saying all of this is because my story is probably very relatable to a lot of the women out there who are about my age, where their parents were trying to fix a problem when it really wasn't a problem. I'm going to circle around that and say, I have 3 children, and I have a daughter and I have 2 sons. And when they were teenagers, young, 11 to whatever, 2 of them specifically, I were a little on the fluffier side, and it triggered me so deeply in my soul, but I knew I had to keep my mouth shut. I knew that I had to provide healthy food for them, try to keep them active as possible, and let life and their metabolic systems that are perfect do what it's supposed to do. And it did. It did what it was supposed to do because I didn't force my children into diets. I didn't restrict the food that they ate. I didn't hide them and shame them for being a little on the heavier side. And so, and it does, it started that night. And again, thank God I had therapy. Thank God I was working on myself. And thank God I had the ability to see that clear. And now for myself, I was a lost cause, right? I had already, I know I wasn't lost cause, but at that point, I wasn't metabolically going to change my system at that point without some drastic efforts. But they were children. They were just growing. And so I guess I'm saying all of that to say that there is genetics in here, but there's a lot that has to do with how you're nurtured and how you're brought up and how you're, not to say that one of my children couldn't get and have some metabolic issues later in life. That certainly can happen. But at that time, I just knew that I needed to help them make the better decisions about food. And every kid loves candy. Every kid wants to. They're going to learn real quick. You eat that bag of candy, you're going to get sick. And they did. They learned some of those lessons early on, whereas I, as a child, wasn't allowed to eat those things because I was fat.
Right.
And so it was always going after the things I shouldn't have. So I know that's a lot I just said, but I just felt like it really paved the groundwork for my personal eating disorder, disordered eating, and diet mentality.
Oh, I relate to all of it. I grew up, I shared other things in the past. That one dinner where my dad said, "Are you having more oink?" Like, it wasn't a singular situation. My nickname in my early teens in my family was Thunder Thighs. Okay. So I have always had larger legs. So Thunder Thighs, I've always been very self-conscious about my legs. And only recently have I started to question, like, do I have lipedema? Like, do I have lipedema? I'm not sure. I haven't gotten officially diagnosed, but if you look at my legs, it may be there. And my mother, she doesn't have a diagnosis. That's a whole other topic for another time. But those are things that my sister why it was in our family. It was, why can't you look like her? Yep. It was, who says that? right? But again, I get it. And my brother's
emotionally immature parents say that.
It's
That's
like,
who say that.
Yeah, exactly. And my dad was in Herbalife, like,
Mm-hmm.
and then another hallmark of my childhood was, because I'm in my late 40s now, is we were around during that Blockbuster time. Blockbuster has come and Blockbuster Video has gone. Like,
We saw it happen.
we have seen the rise and fall of but it was on the rise when I was a kid. And when we got A's on our report card, we could rent a video.
Mm-hmm.
My dad would make homemade pizza because that was something that he did. And then this also tells you that I grew up in the 90s, was he made homemade beer. And I was allowed to have homemade beer if I got A's on my report card. Now, that is probably, like, times have changed, right?
Yeah.
But it was all like around food. It was, okay, this food is reward. So food is a reward. And then don't eat too much. So very much like this double-edged sword, right? Like, don't eat too much. And here's your food as reward. Don't do this. Make sure you clean your plate. And my mom was always on a diet. My grandmother was always on a diet. There was always restrictive. So there was a lot of talk in restriction and things like that, and dieting, on a diet. And I did what you did. I did not want my son to feel judged for his body. Now, I have one, he's a boy, but I know a couple of years ago when he was, 9, 10, it was also probably when we were going through COVID, he did plump up a bit. And I remember talking to some friends and colleagues, and they said, he will grow, let it be. So it wasn't a discussion with him in terms of his body. It was more about bringing all foods in and entertaining the plethora of different foods. Because the other thing is, I can't control what happens at school. I can control what I give him and what comes into our house. But that was the other thing. If he was able to buy snacks at school, there may be more junk. I was not in control of what happened at my mother's house. So his first McDonald's episode, his first soda did not happen with me. That was not something that I fostered, not out of restriction, but because I knew once we opened that door, or even at other kids' houses, that it wasn't something that I would necessarily be able to monitor. And I didn't want those to get put on a pedestal. I wanted him to have this firm foundation. And he does. And one of the things that I love that I have witnessed, similar to I'm going to provide as healthier, broad range of different foods as possible. One of the things that I really love is when he says he's done, or when he's full, he's done.
Absolutely. There's no clean plate club around here.
There's no cleaner plate club around here. I will ask certain things, like if he asks for something for breakfast, let's say he says, "Oh, I want waffles." And I'll say, "Okay, well, where's your protein?" And he'll say, "Okay, can I get some sausage, or can I get a boiled egg?" Or if for certain things, I'll say, "Well, where's your vegetable?" He'll say, "Okay, I want cucumber," or "I want a salad with that." So I'll ask that. And the reason I do that is to be inclusive, where, okay, we're having not even a well-balanced plate, but if you have a vegetable, like, where's the vegetable? Where's your protein? Where's your fiber? And he'll even say to me, it's really funny because now he's 12. He's like, he'll come out of the bathroom. This is TMI, but he'll come out of the bathroom. He'll be like, "I need some more fiber. Which fruits and vegetables have the most fiber? I need fiber." And I'm like,
that's huge. That is huge. You're teaching. And that's what I think, that we get this opportunity as to kind of look back, and we can teach our children about nutrition and about their diet, and not spin it in a diet mentality, negative way. There's no food that's off limits.
Right.
There's nothing that we cannot not eat. It's just, how are we going to put it? And putting, like, I love the fact that you said, I didn't want to put it on a pedestal. And that is also very important. We're not putting things on pedestals. And I do know there are certain behaviors that Vacation mode was one of those particular behaviors where there were foods that we ate on vacations that we normally, and I think I've shared this before somewhere along the line, where the wheels would fall off on vacation. And that I look back on that, and now as adults, all my kids are adults. And as an adult, we really work, I think, hard, all of us, when we vacation together, to have some balance. Yeah, we're on vacation. We get a little bit more, maybe a little bit more wild on things, but try not to put that on a pedestal either, that we're here, especially if we're in exotic places. I'm blessed and I get to travel a lot with my children around the country, around the world, actually. And so when we're in destinations where we can eat alternate types of foods and cuisine, we get to do that. And I know that's something that you do, Foster, with your son as well, is plating up foods that are not right down the middle of the chicken nugget train. Very unique, very cultural. Yeah. And we live in an environment, in a society where we need to expose our children to that. We need to expose those, not just our children, the people that we know, open up our own palate to all the kinds of foods, because there are some amazing cuisines out there. Oh, yeah. I love Indian food. I love Mediterranean foods. And growing up, and again, we live in a very diverse country, and we get that opportunity to see these folks and eat those types of foods. Whereas growing up, the most exotic thing we had really was Chinese and maybe Mexican, maybe Italian was just basically pizza. You probably can relate a little bit to that as well. Yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of those types of foods, but there was definitely the sweets, the Little Debbies, the cakes, the cookies. Those kinds of things I think were more for us as kids, that were that sugar pushed on us.
And growing up for me, we always had cereal for breakfast. Yeah. What's really fascinating in my house now. Yeah. I do not have cereal. Like we do. Okay. That's not true. We have Magic Spoon, and we have it every once in a while. And that's it.
I don't even know what that is, but okay.
It's like a high protein cereal.
Okay.
And
because I know nothing about cereals these days.
Have cereal. Like that's the only thing. And it's mostly for my son, because he doesn't eat cereal for breakfast. Like he actually, that's what I was chuckling at when you were talking about vacation. We go on this far away destination, and because I do expose him to a wide variety of foods, what does he want when we're on this wild destination? Cocoa Puffs. Oh, because he won't get it at home. Because here is my line in the sand. I don't go down the cereal aisle in the grocery store. And when he goes with me, I don't go down the cereal aisle. And he has said, why can't I have this? And I said, if you can tell me one nutritional benefit of this food product, I will buy it. But if it has zero nutritional benefit, what is it giving you? So where I think the pedestal sometimes is flavor. But when we realize it's not actually even a food, it's like a food product. What am I getting from it? What am I getting other than calories, right? Because calories do not equal nutrition. They do not equal sustenance. They do not equal, like when we think of calorie dense but nutrition poor. So I know I went off on a tangent, but
no. We both have a little bit, but I think that it's legs and foundational ground for the reason why so many of us are here listening to this podcast, and we're talking about disordered eating disorders, and binge eating and things like that. That we're having this conversation because of the environment that we come from. So
then he had it while we were away, and then he came home. And I do think I did get $1 just because I was like, okay, well, we'll see. He didn't even finish the box. Yeah. But it was also because I bought it because I said, okay, if he wants this reminder of the vacation, sure. But I'm going to see, like, I'm just going to open, because I don't want to create a restriction pattern.
Not sure good or bad food.
It's good or bad is, okay, well, we'll have this. And I would tell him, where are you getting your nutrition for breakfast if it's not from here? And then I would have him figure that out. And we would figure that out together, because a lot of times the things that we're eating, and I've shared this, and I think Dr. Smith shared this in the podcast that we did together, is there's food and then there's products.
Absolutely.
And so those are things that are also generated by the food industry that also market to kids. So my son, for the longest time, that's why I have the magic spoon, because he wanted Fruit Loops. And I said, I'm not getting Fruit Loops. Once again, no. And I said, okay, here, I found an alternative, the magic spoon, which is kind of it has that same type of, I guess they have that tutti fruity flavor or whatever, but it has protein. It doesn't have grains. It has fiber. I wouldn't say it's the most nutritious food in the world, but it's going to be far more nutritious than the sugary stuff. It's lower in sugar, like all that stuff.
Absolutely. And you're teaching that you can find balance amongst foods that are the good, better, best, right?
The better, best.
And you're not always going to eat off of the best list. You're going to eat, some is going to be good and it's going to be okay food. Some's going to be better than that. And then you'll have the old stuff. So really it's all about the framework and how you're framing it in your own mind, and then teaching it to those. And again, we're both sharing our experiences with our children, because
absolutely
we learn as they learn as well. And we teach as we learn to them. I love that we're kind of wrapping around some of this, because even good foods for us can be dangerous if you are struggling with disordered eating, or if you're struggling with overeating. And I remember right after surgery, 6 months a year or whatever, there were certain things that I could have around that they were fine for me. But there were other things I realized, even though they were good for me foods, I would overconsume them. And I had to look at why I was doing. And that's kind of a whole nother conversation. And that's something that you and I worked very hard on when I initially started your program, is to try to understand why I was reaching towards certain foods, because there's a lot of times there's reasons behind why you're trying to satisfy a feeling or whatever. And now I get the opportunity to use some of those strategies with those that I coach, but I'm meaning specific, like peanut butter. I eat all that.
I was thinking nuts, because we have a couple women that we work with that a handful of nuts, it's calorie dense. Is it nutrition dense? Yes, it has healthy fats. Yeah. It has some protein in it, but it's mostly a fat. Does it have healthy carbs? Does it have fiber? Yes. But I just wanted to add that, because those are things that are definitely nourishing and they're good for us, and we can overeat them in abundance, and it can be even mindless.
Absolutely. And popcorn's another one of those.
Popcorn.
That we have to be very careful about post-bariatric surgery, because we have a smaller stomach. GLP-1 people, their stomachs aren't restricted physically, but
unless they've had surgery first.
But the hormone does restrict the emptying of the stomach. It slows things down, so they will feel fuller faster. And for instance, peanut butter was one of those specific foods for me that I could consume a lot of calories of it, because it was very easily digestible. It was good for me. It had good things. And that I would find myself really over consuming it to a fault, and so really, even after surgery, I had to really look at all of the things I was eating, how I was using that food, and making sure that I wasn't having disordered eating thinking around it.
Can we go into some definitions really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Disordered eating, right? Let's start there. Disordered eating, frequent dieting, food guilt, overeating when stressed, restricting all week, then overdoing it on the weekends, or even being good, quote unquote, all day long, and then letting go in the evenings, or feeling I deserve this. I've been good all day. Common, but normalized by diet culture. So an eating disorder, clinically diagnosable. And they're the ones that I have here: BED, which is binge eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia, and it meets strict clinical criteria according to the DSM-5. Frequency, level of distress, and impact on health. And I'm not going into the DSM criteria because it'll take too long, but those are the top 3. All eating disorders, here's something very important. All eating disorders involve some level of disordered eating, but not all disordered eating is a diagnosable eating disorder, right? So if that's the big picture, then we could look at 2 behaviors people can confuse, which is overeating and binge eating, because they are distinctly different.
And that's what I was just explaining, the difference between overeating something and binge eating something. So continue.
So overeating happens to everyone. Thanksgiving, vacations, emotional nights, right? The one that comes into my mind most common is Bridget Jones' Diary with her. And I don't even remember what kind of ice cream it was, but that's just like movie scenes. These are like classic, right? Not necessarily about control, just volume or context, right? Or eating when, I even tend to think eating when not hungry, or just eating, even though it says overeating, but I can also think that it could also pertain to eating to feel better, right? Versus binge eating, which is marked by a loss of control, secrecy, rapid eating. There's a lot of impulsivity related to it. And there's also research to show that, because we know that there are certain medications like Vyvanse, for example, that help with BED, that help with binge eating disorder. It works on very specific neuropathways of the brain. Vyvanse is also used for ADHD, but why it's used for BED is as a result of the impulsivity, and the rapid eating and the impulsivity go hand in hand. So people with binge eating, or who are characterized as binge eaters, are continuing past fullness and experience shame afterwards. It's more than just eating too much. It's eating driven by compulsion and emotional distress. And then I just wanted to include the cycle of diet mentality, which could come in either one of those, or which is be good, restrict, then the cravings build, then there's a binge, whether it's an actual binge of binge eating or whether it's overeating, it could be one or the other, but there's an episode, then shame, then restrict again. And it's important to recognize that the cycle isn't about willpower. It's biology and psychology colliding together. And this is where we need to start to, one of the things that I never knew, I'm pretty sure I had binge eating disorder, but I was not even aware prior to surgery, is that slowing down. So that impulsivity, I do personally have a diagnosis for ADHD. I think that slowing down was what aggravated me so much whenever I would go to a dietitian or nutritionist that would say, just mindfully eat, just mindful. And I used that little voice because I felt like so patronized. I felt so patronized, like nobody was in the experience to understand the intense anxiety, that aggravation, that emotional distress, which is very characteristic of binge eating, that I experienced. And mindful eating and slowing down, at that point in time, I felt like it was impossible for me.
Absolutely. And I think that there's so many bariatric patients, whether they're on a GLP-1 or have had surgery, could really relate to that the slowing down is so difficult. That is one of the reasons why they overeat and they overconsume, whether it's through a binge or through just overconsumption, is to actually help themselves slow down. I don't know what the statistics are for people who've had surgery or are on GLP-1s that actually have ADD or ADHD. But I know the people that we work with, I think probably 3/4 of them either are diagnosed or have a fairly high level of coincidences to have ADD. And this is a really common, because it's food, it's not alcohol or drugs or shopping or sex, it's food. So it's a more acceptable way to calm your nervous system down. And so those folks that don't utilize drugs or alcohol to excess, they can find themselves using food to soothe themselves. And it is because, again, if you look at those people that are alcoholics or drug addicts, they also have a very high rate of ADD. And it's that self-medication through those modalities that calm their nervous systems down enough to function. And so it's a very similar to me condition. I'm not a doctor, so it's real hard for me to make these blanket statements, but as long as I've been doing this with you and my own personal experience, also having history with addiction and things like that, and being in that environment, I see the similarities.
So let me throw some statistics out here.
I knew you have some up your sleeve.
Okay. So individuals with ADHD have a higher prevalence of being overweight or obese compared to the general population, with some studies indicating, now this is a risk, a 70% higher risk of obesity in adults and 40% higher in children. That does not mean that 40 or 70% of people, that doesn't mean that they are. This is a risk factor. Yes. Now, if we go back to what are the percentage of bariatric patients who have a diagnostic criteria for ADHD, studies show, because there's various studies, I'm like pooling studies, between 7% to 38%, but the frequently cited average is 20 to 21% overall. So 20 to 21%. But when we look at the overlap, like between bariatric surgery and ADHD, that's where we come to a higher statistic where there's an overlap of about 50% between 40 and 60.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. So when we are looking at that, but that's not binge eating disorder, right? But the binge eating disorder is a totally different, let's say, statistic. However, also there are estimates where their prevalence in pre-bariatric surgery patients, again, these are various studies that have been done. So it depends on the study and the overall statistics. They found frequencies of 7%, 10%, 12% of pre-bariatric surgery patients, like pre-evals.
And that's a tough one, though, to get that information because, for instance, I know there are quite a few women that we work with that really were not diagnosed with ADD until after they had surgery. So if you're going to have surgery and you're going to your site eval, you have no clue. You just know you're overweight, you're obese, you've got these comorbidities, and you're like, I got to get this weight off because I want to lower my A1C and all these other things. You may not even understand or know that you've got ADHD.
I didn't know. And I was then, too, a licensed mental health practitioner. I did not know. And I thought I was self-aware.
Yeah. And that's what we are so good as human beings at surviving. And you were surviving with the tool that you had, which was over-consuming, whether it was binge eating or just overeating. And then your body got into a metabolic disruption and the obesity happened. And I think that we become very efficient at how we're working. And until you take that away, until you take away the ability to calm your nervous system down, which is what food does for so many of us, is when we're overeating or we're binge eating, it calms our nervous system down so we can function. Or it is what we do after accomplishing things. One of the things that you're reading about is just that overeating or reward after you get done with a long day or accomplish something. And that is one of the things that for me, I had to really work on post-surgery is because that reward was taken away, or the ability to get the same satisfaction after accomplishing all of those things throughout the day that I couldn't get home and then eat to calm my nervous system down because I was go, 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 go all day long. And that's so many people. That is the reality of it. I did have a diagnosis prior to surgery for binge eating disorder. I did take Vyvanse. I was actually on it during surgery and post-surgery. I had gone off of it since then, but it was a very, very helpful medication for me because it slowed me down and helped me to realize some of the actions that I had been taking that were really in order to calm my nervous system and to cope with the chaos of life. And some of the chaos was self-created by anxiety and that kind of back and forth and anxious. I was never depressed, but I definitely had that kind of that up and down cyclical cycle, and we as women, we are on that hormonal roller coaster too, that depending on where you are in your cycle, you get a little manic and then we got to put labels on some of that stuff. Or I can't be manic because I have to manage 3 children and a household. So how am I going to take that manic down a notch or 2? Well, I'm going to eat to calm my nervous system.
Well, and I will say that what I noticed, and I've seen this in women and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. It's going to have to be another episode if people are interested in me going into the menopause. But I will say that there is a higher prevalence of diagnoses for women for neurodivergence, some variation of ADHD that emerges in the time frame that women are perimenopausal or menopausal because the hormonal changes impact executive functioning. Yes, estrogen impacts executive functioning, like hands down, the brain fog and all of that. I'm not going to go into the details. We can go into the details in another time, but it does. So you will see a rise in women. My diagnoses for ADHD happened in 2021. And I guess technically I was perimenopausal, but I don't think I was perimenopausal till last year because I didn't really start suffering with the symptoms until last year. So I had already been, but clearly because of that diagnosis, I may have already been pre-peri and not even realized it because I wasn't having the symptoms, other than what felt like the onset of a more intense, unmanageable. Like I've known that I've had ADHD for many, many years without a formal diagnosis, but I got on medication in 2021.
I think for a lot of women that happens too. But also, I do think there's a pot of gold possibly at the end of the rainbow when it comes to this, is that if they exhibit some symptoms of ADHD and they're very uncomfortable with it, they can get on some medications during those years and possibly go off of them. I had a very dear friend of mine who definitely has ADD, and it was so exacerbated. She'd managed it prior to menopause fairly well through movement, meditation, things like that. Some of these things that we do to kind of keep our nervous system calm, which not everybody can do. But during perimenopause and menopause, it was very unmanageable and she had to go on medication for it. And then post, she was able to go off of the medication. There is that option for some women. For some, they'll stay on it for the rest of their lives.
Well, and I want to share something that's pertinent to this so that people know, because when I started to have symptoms at the end of 2023 and the start of 2024, I ended up talking to my practitioner, not realizing it was perimenopause. So I was like, I need to increase my dose. Well, we did increase my dose and it didn't help. Like we increased my dose of my ADHD medicine and it was like nothing. And that was also because I have developed more self-awareness. It wasn't about changing the medication. I had increased my dose, but the increased dose wasn't doing anything. I was taking the medication and then I was like, okay, I think I need a coffee too. No, Kristen, you need estrogen, girl. You need HRT. So I went and did a bunch of tests. And again, that's a whole other thing. But then guess what? I lowered my dose because then what happened is when I started to get hormone replacement therapy. And when that shifted, it was like, oh, that's what I needed. And I don't need that increased dose. And then I went back to my practitioner and I was like, oops, my bad. And he was like, no, that makes sense. But I wasn't exhibiting any other symptoms at that time. So we did increase my dose temporarily. But I think that's where the self-awareness and the self-advocacy, when we know ourselves, because I don't want to be on a higher, and it also wasn't helping, but it was, these are like
strong medications.
And
there can be side effects to them that can be hard to live with.
I take them very seriously.
Yes,
right? So
yes.
That's something that we want to look at, not only personally, but professionally. And then I was like, yep, okay, time to go back down. And it was also such a relief just to find what the answer was, right? So for me, it was the HRT, but that's where we start to look at, okay, all of these different moving parts,
yes.
right? And then we're trying to manage our emotions and eating. And so I think that when we're talking about back to the topic of eating disorders versus disordered eating, I also want to come back to that role of diet mentality, which, yes, we did talk about in a previous episode, but I want to talk about how it impacts our relationship with food and disordered eating or eating disorder, because diet culture trains us, as we've already talked about, like label food as good and bad, tie our self-worth to our body size, believe in all or nothing success or failure, especially if I was good all day, then I had this, gosh, I was so bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're trained to talk to ourselves like this. The mentality creates disordered patterns, which shame, guilt, obsessive tracking, yo-yo cycles, the mentality of disordered eating patterns. If our only measure of success is the scale, then the other thing that happens that people will do is they will have what they call a pouch reset. Pouch resets are absolute bullshit. They are absolute bullshit because they tie you back to diet mentality. And here's the thing, and you and I have had conversations about this, and I'm not going to get into this today either, but I will say this. There is a whole other culture out there that talks about fasting, okay? A pouch reset is not the same as a fast. There are hundreds, if not thousands of years and spiritual ties to fasting. I'm not anti-fasting. I want to say that I'm not anti-fasting. I am anti-dieting to force your body into submission to get to a certain number. If you are fasting, doing a spiritual fast or a cleanse, people will say, and I know that there are dietitians out there that are against it. If you look at all of human history, there are many doctors that show the cellular functioning, or what we call the turnover of our cells. Cellular autophagy is the clinical word, can wipe out the negative cells. It can be a positive impact on the body. If you are in a diet mentality, if you are in a fight with your body and with food, fasting is a no-go. I worked with an obesity medicine physician for a while, and she was like, I recommend fasting to patients. And I said, have you thought about the psychological damage that could cause if they are in a disordered eating pattern? I will tell you, I am not anti-fasting. I would never, ever recommend fasting to someone who has not fully neutralized their relationship with food, because it will set you back. It will set you back because you're going to fight with, I only lost this, I only lost that. The pouch reset is a form of a diet. You are not changing your patterns. You're trying to change the scale.
It's a quick fix. And so many people go into fasting thinking it's going to be a quick fix as well. And you and I have had multiple conversations about fasting. There's a time and a place for those. And I would agree, I'm not anti-fasting at all. You have to do the work. You have to do the emotional work.
I would never, that's why I wanted to talk about it and be open, because I feel like people need to know I'm not anti-fasting and I'm not pro-fasting. I think it holds, it's the way that I think about fasting, honestly, is that it's sacred.
And I would agree with that it holds a space in our lives that can be utilized. But if you're in that diet mentality, it's only going to do damage to you.
It will do damage. It will do damage.
The goal of, I believe, what you do, the work you do, the work we do together, is to walk people through healing the diet culture and the damage that has been done from years and years and years of the abuse that we give ourselves through the diet mentality. And whether it is binge eating, whether it is an eating disorder, whether it is just disordered eating, is something like that. That's the stuff that I think that you coach, you give space for, that you work in the community. And those that are listening to this, you're tapping into a group of people that understand what it's like to have walked in those shoes of this disordered eating, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we know where you're coming from. And that's why I think it's important, first of all, to get out there the definitions, right? And let people know that this is exactly what, we're talking about here. And then you can decide a plan of action. Like we talked about briefly prior to the call, is you got to be aware of what's going on first, right? You got to accept that this is where you're at. And then you have to take action. And right now we're just talking, and whoever's listening is just listening. And maybe it's bringing some awareness to these folks that are hearing some of this stuff for the first time, or maybe it's the 50th time, and for whatever reason it resonates. And now you need to accept, okay, you are where you are. What is your action plan? Because we cannot heal unless we take action and actively heal.
And I would ask people to ask themselves, right? If you've ever wondered, is what I'm doing normal? And you've had me bring this question up into group where I've asked our group members, what is healthy for you? And literally they look at me like I have three heads, because you guys, I love you so much. Everybody who's listening, I love you so much, but you are so used to other people telling you what to do. You're so used to, and I was there. I want you guys to think for yourselves. I want you guys to go, what does work for me? Because you know what? You and I have had a similar conversation, Francis, and I'm going to put this out there. You eat oatmeal. There's nothing wrong with oatmeal. There's nothing wrong with oatmeal. You have told me like oatmeal is like one of your most favorite breakfasts, or like a regular breakfast. Oatmeal does not work for me. If somebody said, Kristen, go eat oatmeal, I know my body. I do chia seed pudding, right? I am not going to do oatmeal, because that level of carbs in the morning, I know what it does to me and my hunger over the rest of the day. It's not good. It's not good. It works for you. It does not work for me, but I think for myself, you think for yourself. We're able to say, hey, this works, this doesn't. It's beautiful. So here's where I want people to ask, is what I'm doing normal? Normal for who? Normal for me? Normal for this lifestyle, for living on the go? Or is it a problem? When food becomes a problem, it's that either you're thinking about it a lot, and I'm not even just talking about food noise and the gut pathways to the brain. I'm talking about, it's like food porn. Like you're like, ooh, like it's exciting and stimulating, like that you need an outlet, like dopamine, right? And then there's, if you're worshiping food, you have food on a food pedestal, where I've asked this question, I put it in blog posts. Who are you without sugar? I have done very little sugar, and not as a form of restricting, but noticing, right? Curiosity. So not as a form of it not having nothing to do with the scale. I've asked people that question, and they may have what you may call like a sugar addiction. And they're like, who am I without sugar? What? I don't even know. It's important that we ask ourselves so that we can start to explore. Nobody is taking your binky. So when somebody has like what we may call a food addiction or a sugar addiction, we think of, they're taking away my stuff, right? Because that's your form of coping. So we've got to start to ask these questions. What is normal for you, right? Some people eat 5 meals a day. Some people eat 3 meals a day. Some people do high protein, moderate carbs. Some people do high protein, low carb. Like what works better for your body? I had a genetic test done, and it said that, yes, I tend to weigh more than normal. And then it also said your body tends to do better with a lot of leafy greens and lower carb. It didn't give me a number. It wasn't like, I can imagine some of the people we work with that I love them so much. Well, how many? Like, is it 20? Is it 40? Is it 60? Can you give me a number? And it's like, guys, you've got to be curious.
Like that number may change based on your age. It may change based on your activity. And again, we're so ruled by numbers and by following a rule. It's just damaging us. It really is. It's like you said,
be
really
curious
about what works for you. And
Yeah.
and I know we're getting ready, wrapping things up, but I also feel like post-surgery patients are so afraid to try new things that they get caught up in the same old because of the fear of messing it up or the fear of doing it wrong. And
Yep. There is no wrong.
As many clients or people that you've worked with that haven't gotten to goal or haven't been able to successfully maintain their weight loss, there are those that really are in such fear that they're going to regain weight that it paralyzes.
It almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really does.
Only because it becomes, to your point, like so paralyzing that it has the power to keep people stuck from taking action. So this is why bariatric patients face a unique set of challenges when it comes to food, body, and coping. Okay, surgery is powerful, but it doesn't erase emotional eating or disordered food rules. The early honeymoon period can often quiet food noise, but old patterns can resurface later. And this is why working on your relationship with food is so important and starting to ask those questions like, what is normal eating for me? What does that look like? What does healthy look like for me? And that's where the identity work that I've been bringing into my practice is important. Who do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to eat? Perfectionism and shame, that is linked to I must follow the rules exactly or I've failed, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing we didn't get a chance to talk about much today, let's make it a completely different episode about transfer addiction, but I'll just weave this in here. When food is no longer the coping tool, the nervous system hunts for substitutes. Alcohol, shopping, sex, relationships, workaholism, right? And it's not about weakness. It's about the body and the brain desperately seeking regulation, but we're also seeking connection. We're seeking belonging. We're seeking fulfillment. And we're seeking to be seen, to be heard. And again, we're wired, this is the Brene Brown quote, we're hardwired for connection. Mm-hmm. We want, it's not just love, but we want that sense of belonging. And if we're not getting that in other areas of our life, then we're seeking substitutes because in our bodies, we don't feel safe. So if disordered eating, diet mentality, and transfer addiction are so intertwined, how do we move forward, right? So some very quick things. Identity shift, moving from I'm a dieter to I'm a nourished, whole, healing person. Yes, that takes multiple shifts. It's easier said than done, right? Nervous system regulation. We need some safety cues, grounding in our body, and some capacity building because we need capacity to function. If we're always running on empty, we're searching, right? Food reframed. It's not punishment and it's not reward. It's fuel, it's connection, it's sustenance, it's nourishment, right? So this is also where I'm going to say food over food products, because food products tend to be high in calories, low in nutrition. It's not about judgment. It's literally about facts. It's literally
absolutely. Follow the food. If you're eating something, follow what it is you're craving.
Right.
And look at what you're putting in your body and look at how it makes your body feel. And the other thing, just like you were saying, these are the ways that we can move from having these type of issues. These are some of the solutions, right? Here we are, we're in the action stages of it. And that support is key to, yes, you've got the identity shift, the nervous system regulation, the food reframe, but finding the support,
community, the connection. And yes, therapy can help. I have clients who have just started therapy and I'm so proud of them, but you also need the psychoeducation. And I know this is not a sales pitch, but this is also why I do what I do, because you go to therapy, whether it's once a week or once every 2 weeks, you're not necessarily going to have time for the psychoeducation. And therapists love me because they're like, yes, go get the psychoeducation because you get more done. You go farther faster, right? When you have the psychoeducation, when you have the awareness, when you have the safe conversations, when you know you're not alone. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be with me or any of my programs. It could be in a different space, but you need community support. You need that to know you're not alone, but to also have conversations that are being led by people that aren't diet mentality people that are like, hey, all foods fit. How are you making this work for you? And the other thing is healing doesn't mean you'll never emotionally eat again. It means you'll respond with awareness and not on autopilot. And that's where reflection and insight and awareness becomes a powerful tool, because awareness really opens the door to change. And when we're honest with ourselves, then that's where we can really step into change, even if we're having feelings about it, where it's like, oh, I don't like this, right? And yet it's still there, right? You can have heavy feelings about, wow, this is happening, this is showing up. And that awareness gives you the power to think about it, to see that there are other options. And you can be sad, you can be disappointed, you might even be disgusted, right? And that's okay, because we all can work through those feelings, regulation stuff. When you're in it, again, it doesn't need to be with us, but it could be you're partnering with your team to support you in shifting that, because the feelings aren't the end. And when we're turning to food because we can't handle the feelings, then that's, again, that cycle. So
if you're looking for a community, one of the things I would suggest, whether it's here or elsewhere, finding a place that is going to support you where you're at, but also help you push yourself to the next level, not just be yes man, not just coddle you. You want to grow. There's got to be,
you want to be challenged, and I mean in a good way, not like,
yes,
not
want to be challenged.
Challenged.
Nobody wants to get off of a coaching call or whatever and have the client feels so terrible about what happened that they're burying themselves in a bag of potato chips. But you also want them to leave the call and question some of the behaviors that they've had that are not working for them.
Right.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Yep.
Rewind that, people, because that is the truth. It is really a very important thing, in that we are expecting something to change by not changing. We've got to change. If you want something different, change.
Yeah.
And that's my last statement. That's it. I'm done.
So some final talking points. Yeah. I'm going to put these in the show notes. So folks, I want you to ask yourself, where does disordered eating still show up in my life? Whether you're on a GLP-1 or have had surgery or both, or whether you're thinking about surgery, right? Am I following diet rules, or am I tuning into my body? Am I listening to my body? Am I checking in with my body? Have I noticed myself shifting into other coping behaviors since surgery or since on a GLP-1? And I want to normalize something. These aren't flaws, right? When people talk about self-sabotage, I want you to reframe self-sabotage. These are coping strategies you develop to survive. Now we have an opportunity. We can choose differently. We can choose different coping mechanisms. And I just want to remind you guys, you're not broken. You're human. Healing is possible. And that's the shift. That's the shift. And I'm excited to hear what you guys think about this specific episode. We touched on a lot of different things. We may have even touched on some controversial things. And
not us. No.
Yeah. So let's step into where we are, even if that's a little emotionally difficult to do, right? We've got to face our diet baggage, our old patterns, and the risks that may come in terms of transfer addiction. But just reminding ourselves that we are deserving and worthy of support. We are deserving and worthy of the changes that we're creating. And we want to release the harmful patterns that are normalized by diet culture, move towards the identity and the life that we want to create, and the relationship with food that we want to create. Right. So I want you guys to start thinking about that. And I realize that's an open-ended thing, but how do you want to interact with food? And how do you want food to support you? Right. So I think these are some great things to share. And that's my end. That's my end. And I'm always grateful that you guys are here to listen. And again, if this has helped you, come hang out with us in our Facebook group. It's a free Facebook group, Bariatric Mindset Mavens. I'll put the link in the show notes, and you can start to see some of the daily prompts that we share that get you to think a little deeper. So thank you all for listening. Once again, this wraps up another amazing episode of the Bariatric Mindset Podcast, and we will see you in the next episode.